The baby's cry cut through the cold morning air like a siren, sharp and desperate, but the mother holding him never heard it. Her body stiffened without warning, her arms locking as if invisible wires had yanked her muscles tight. The next second, she collapsed onto the concrete beside the gas pump, her head striking the ground with a hollow thud that echoed across the empty lot. The infant slipped from her grasp, still strapped in his carrier seat, tipping dangerously toward the pavement. For a brief, terrifying moment, there was no one there to see it happen. No one, except a tired truck driver who had almost driven away. If you believe that kindness still exists in this world and that sometimes strangers become angels at the exact moment we need them most, take a second to like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. The morning had started badly long before the seizure. Rachel had barely slept the night before, her baby boy Noah waking every hour with restless cries that came from teething pain she didn't fully understand how to soothe. She was only 24, a new mother still adjusting to life after her husband's sudden departure 3 months earlier. He hadn't died. In many ways, what he did felt worse. He had simply packed his things, left a note about needing space, and disappeared into another state with someone Rachel didn't even know existed. Since then, exhaustion had become her permanent companion. Money was tight, her nerves were frayed, and every decision felt heavier than it should have been. That morning she was driving to her mother's house 2 towns over because she could no longer pretend she was managing everything alone. Her head had been pounding since dawn, a deep throbbing pressure behind her eyes that made the sunlight feel hostile. She had ignored it, telling herself it was just fatigue. When the gas light blinked on in her aging sedan, she pulled into the nearest station without thinking, more focused on keeping Noah calm than on her own dizziness. The station was quiet, just one pickup truck parked near the convenience store and a large semi idling at the far pump. She barely noticed the truck driver climbing down from his cab, stretching his stiff back after hours on the road. Her world had narrowed to the rhythm of motherhood: unbuckle the car seat, adjust the blanket, swipe the credit card, start the pump. Then the aura came. It started as a flicker in her vision, like heat waves rising from asphalt. Her hearing dulled, and a strange metallic taste filled her mouth. Somewhere deep in her mind, a warning bell rang, but she didn't recognize it for what it was. She only knew something was wrong. Her hand tightened instinctively around Noah's carrier handle. Her knees felt weak. The next second, her body betrayed her completely. From across the lot, Daniel saw the woman fall. He had spent 20 years driving trucks across the country, long enough to develop an instinct for emergencies. Something about the way her body jerked unnaturally triggered alarm in him before his brain fully processed what he was seeing. He broke into a run, boots pounding against the pavement, his exhaustion forgotten. As he got closer, he realized with a jolt of panic that she wasn't just fainting. She was seizing violently, her arms and legs convulsing uncontrollably. The baby's carrier had tipped sideways, the infant inside beginning to wail in confusion and fear. Daniel moved without hesitation. Years earlier, his younger sister had developed epilepsy after a head injury, and he had learned what seizures looked like and how to respond. He gently rolled Rachel onto her side to keep her airway clear, placing his folded jacket under her head to prevent further injury. His movements were careful but urgent, his heart hammering. He spoke softly, though he knew she couldn't hear him, words meant more to steady himself than to reach her. With his free hand, he steadied the baby carrier, checking quickly that the infant hadn't been hurt. Noah's face was red with crying, tiny fists flailing, but he was alive and safe. The seizure lasted less than a minute, but to Daniel it felt endless. When Rachel's body finally went still, her breathing shallow and uneven, he pulled out his phone and called emergency services. As he waited, he found himself watching the baby more than the mother, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of protectiveness he didn't fully understand. Maybe it was because the child looked so helpless, or maybe it was because he hadn't held his own daughter since she was a toddler. His ex-wife had taken her across the country years ago after their marriage collapsed under the strain of his constant travel. Since then, Daniel had buried his loneliness under miles of highway and late-night truck stops. But in that moment, kneeling on cold concrete beside a stranger, he felt something shift inside him. Rachel regained consciousness slowly, confusion flooding her mind before memory returned. Her head hurt, her body ached, and there was a stranger crouched beside her holding her baby carrier steady. Panic surged through her until she heard Noah crying and realized he was still there. Relief crashed over her so intensely that tears began streaming down her temples. She couldn't form words yet, but her eyes locked onto Daniel's face with desperate gratitude. The ambulance arrived minutes later, lights flashing against the pale morning sky. Paramedics assessed Rachel quickly, confirming she had experienced a seizure likely triggered by extreme exhaustion and dehydration. She was placed on a stretcher, Noah secured beside her, and Daniel found himself standing alone again as they loaded them into the ambulance. For a moment, he considered simply returning to his truck and continuing his route. That would have been the normal thing to do. But something stopped him. He climbed back into his cab, started the engine, and followed the ambulance to the hospital. Over the next several hours, Rachel underwent tests while Noah slept peacefully in a bassinet beside her bed. Doctors explained that she likely had an undiagnosed seizure disorder, worsened by stress and lack of sleep. She would need medication, rest, and support, things she wasn't sure she had. When Daniel finally stepped into her room, still wearing his worn denim jacket, she was startled to see him again. He looked awkward standing there, as if unsure whether he belonged. What followed wasn't dramatic or heroic. It was quiet kindness. He had waited because he wanted to make sure she and the baby were okay. He offered to call someone for her when he realized she had no immediate help nearby. He brought her a sandwich from the vending area when he overheard a nurse mention she hadn't eaten. Small gestures, but to Rachel they felt monumental because she had been drowning in isolation for months. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed again unexpectedly. Daniel happened to pass through town regularly on his routes, and he would stop by to check in. At first, Rachel felt embarrassed accepting help from someone she barely knew. But loneliness has a way of dissolving pride. She began to realize that kindness from strangers could sometimes heal wounds that familiar relationships couldn't reach. Daniel, too, was changing. Watching Rachel fight to rebuild her life while caring for Noah stirred something in him he thought he had lost forever, purpose beyond survival. He started taking shorter routes so he could spend more time near home. He reconnected with his daughter after years of silence, encouraged by the reminder that relationships could be rebuilt if someone took the first step. Months later, Rachel stood again at a gas station, this time holding Noah confidently on her hip. She was healthier, stronger, medicated properly, and no longer alone. Daniel pulled up beside her truck, grinning as Noah reached toward him with recognition. The memory of that terrifying morning still lived inside her, but it no longer carried only fear. It carried gratitude. Because that moment, when everything could have gone wrong, was also the moment her life began to change. Before we reach the ending, I have a special request for you. Please comment the word kindness below if you believe one act of compassion can truly change someone's life. Your comments mean more than you realize. The truth is, heroes rarely look like heroes. Sometimes they look like tired truck drivers with sore backs and coffee-stained shirts. Sometimes they appear in the exact moment when hope is slipping away. Rachel would later say that she didn't just survive that day because of medical care. She survived because someone chose not to ignore what they saw. Someone chose to stop. And years later, when Noah was old enough to ask about the man he called Uncle Daniel, Rachel would tell him the story of the morning his life and hers were saved by a stranger who refused to drive away. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Engagement helps these stories reach people who might need hope today. Because somewhere out there, someone is struggling, and maybe your kindness will be the miracle they're waiting for.